the absolute, just the incredible growth that you guys were, scaling at. So what was it like just in such a competitive market, like at that point of time?
It wasn't that competitive, like in the early days. This was one of the things this is one of the things where everyone was telling us something, and then we like looked at the numbers and we're like, what are you guys talking about? So when we changed strategies to be more like the incumbent players, frankly, and again, I do think we brought some, people were delivering in an hour and a half, and I do think we brought some logistical expertise to the table. But like, if you looked at the world in like late 2015, and hopefully I'm answering your question, it was like, San Francisco, LA, New York, had food delivery, right? Postmates was in LA, San Francisco had, DoorDash and Postmates, and they're like, oh, market saturated, totally done. And then we looked at second measure, and it was like, in Florida, there's something like 40,000 deliveries a week in the entire state. And you looked at like Spain and France and Japan and Taiwan and Mexico, and it was like nothing. I mean, it was like this 50,000 deliveries a week business with 70 million people living in the cities. And then you're like, well, in New York, you had, Seamless doing billions of dollars, right, of like GMV. You're like, so what's the difference between Paris and New York? And so, most of the places that we launched, we were the first. And certainly not true in San Francisco, certainly not true in New York, certainly not true. And like, less, in Paris, I think Deliveroo had like I think it was like 50,000 orders a week. It's got to, I don't know what it is now, but it's got to be like 800,000 or 1 million, the total market size now. Miami was zero. So you have a market, the food delivery market in Miami was microscopic for a multi-million person city. So we faced competition some places. We actually looked at the more competitive markets as like ways to consume our competitors' time. Getting to your question about competition, right? So it's like, like Deliveroo was strong in London. We wanted to compete in London. We wanted to win London. We knew it was going to be a slog, but it's pretty hard to compete in like 10 different markets at once. And so, if you're spread too thin as a startup and you have a enterprising, high energy, maybe growth company as we were, and they decide to go compete with you, like, you got to be pretty careful. And you have to make sure you win something in marketplaces, because in marketplaces, when you think about competition, like the risk that Uber had, and it did bite us some places, but we bit more than it bit us, in a lot of cases. If you're not, a significant market share, and it highly depends, right? I mean, if you're 15% market share in a city, you shouldn't be in the city. You're not going to make any money. Because with marketplaces, as this group probably knows, with your businesses, when you're the majority player, you take a disproportionate percentage of the eventual profits in the business. And so, how does that tie back to competition? Well, we wanted to make sure that we were setting ourselves up to be the majority player. So like in France, I think we're like 70-something% market share, right? And Australia is the same. I'm not sure what numbers that have all been disclosed, but I think it's pretty well known that like some of these markets are strong for Uber. And so, like, that's how you think about competition. It's like, how do you become a strong number two so you can have a profitable business? If you're number three, you're toast. How can you position yourself to be number one as many places as possible? And then, you have to think about how do you invest behind that? Because, when you first launch a market, it's really cheap. I mean, all this history about food delivery and ride sharing being so expensive to scale is just total fiction, right? What made things expensive to scale was the fact that like interest rates were zero, and SoftBank and Tiger and all these people were spreading billions of dollars around the world and handing money to companies like us to then hand coupons and discounts to our customers. And so, like Eats was almost profitable like 15 months in. And then it became, and then like said, it was like what's the stat? So like by like September of 2017, I think all of our competitors combined, not including some of the public ones who are older because it's hard to like measure, had raised $700 million. And I'm talking about everywhere except China, right? So you have India, you know, all these competitive markets. But like 8 months after that, they'd raised 7 billion. And so in a world where your competition raised $6-something billion in like 9 months, yeah, it's going to get expensive because their investors expect you to deploy that. So anyway, I'm kind of wandering here on the competition point, but like the markets that we launched where there was no competition were profitable within like 90 days. The markets where we launched where it was intensely competitive might have taken 3 or 4 years to become even break even. And so when you think about competition, I'm a huge believer in marketplaces. You got to be first. And if you're not first, you better get first very, very, very quickly. Otherwise, you're going to get on the other side of the network effect.